Good morning, Tshepo Mahloele. A nice big accolade to you to become a patron of the global citizen movement. There's quite a bit of issues going on with global citizens at the moment, but how did you get involved in this organization in the first place?
I think for me, Alec, I've always been involved in like what infrastructure by its very nature is impactful investments. It's investment which has a positive sort of benefit in terms of like any economy's ability to be competitive, to improve, those things which matter, and then they from a definite sort of like ability to improve the lot of a people in any region. That has definitely been proven, and we know that Africa needs a lot of those investments which can make an impact. So I think it was on the back of that like that when Global Citizen New York, so like the guys called me and said, would I love to be like a patron for Africa. uh for me, it only took 2 seconds to sort of like say, look, this is the type of organization I'd love to be uh involved in, and then so that to enable it, so that Africa stays at the forefront of like attention with regards to all the things that still need to happen, the impact we still need to make. So when you have an organization that's focused on you know tackling climate change, in a major way, that is like very focused on like addressing the the plight of like young girls and women, because they get the most affected in any situation. And like thirdly, you know, uh, uh, challenging the whole systematic barriers which are put in place of developing economies, with to enable them to get into the mainstream. Those sort of like ideals, when they are put together as the focus sort of like ideals for the program for this organization for this year, and going forward, it sort of like resonated with me, because these, link in to what Global Citizen wants to do. You know, ending extreme poverty now, not tomorrow. So it's about like getting things done, and like getting them done now, as opposed to saying, we're gonna be putting these things. We know there are targets to 2030, but we like to start getting things done so that by 2030 we could be there. We could have like made a dent in those things. So I think when they came and invited me to be the global to be the patron for Africa, that sort of like resonated with me. And also I think one of the reasons perhaps like one was approached was all the work that we've done across the continent. We've not just been a South African focused platform. We've done stuff which focus across the continent, but also we also have like platforms which would perhaps like aid in this whole like thing. We have or in with my other head, exposure and ownership of the like arena media platform, and in terms of like using that to sort of like assist the advocacy part of this movement across the continent, using some of our technology platforms. So I think those were some of the elements which perhaps along which one was approached.
The advocacy part is big, and right now it's all over the website is Ukraine.
Yeah.
In South Africa, this is a bit of a hot potato because of the membership of BRICS and certainly the very neutral line that South Africa has tried to follow in the whole invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Does that not put you at something of a disadvantage now, being the patron of Global Citizen for Africa, to actually follow the line that they are following, or have you always just had your own mind anyway on these kind of issues?
I think the way I sort of like look at this, and you look at what's happening in Ukraine right now, it's not anything that when you look at the impact that does have, you know, neutral stance, or if you like fall in any camp, the truth of the matter is that there's the most who get affected are young women and young girls. They suffer the most brunt out of this. We know as Africans how these sort of like movies pan out, and how those most vulnerable get affected. So from a point of view of the neutrality, I think one so like understand where South Africa comes from, saying like it has this long relationship with like with the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, but also like the membership of BRICS, and that's what perhaps like puts makes South Africa take the neutral stance which they've sort of like taken. But I think we know from a South African point of view there is still something which is saying like get involved, get sort of like negotiate and sort these things out, and we have never sort of like I think promoted any form of violence. I think I also come from that sort of like thing, which is, I mean, from the outset, you try and avoid the violence part of it. I think I'm not a politician, but from a business person point of view, and focused on Africa, my, association with this platform goes to the root of trying to address those most vulnerable when, politicians like, cause some of these, challenges that we have as a society.
Global Citizen says stand up for Ukraine. So there's no ambiguity there.
Yeah,
And as the patron, this is not, it doesn't make it easy, and I'm just using that as an
yeah,
example
uh,
because this is a tough job. This is not
yeah,
just the job to stand on platforms and say yes,
yeah.
we believe in doing right, but from time to time the advocacy part of Global Citizen is going to involve you. It's going to cause you to, I don't know, maybe lose business by people who have an opposing view.
I think, from a business point of view, from a humanitarian point of view, we cannot doubt the the position which says that, when all this happens, this is the impact of those things. It would be better to the extent that we didn't have those, actions which have such a detrimental effect on people in general, women and young girls who get most of. So and in all this, my sort of like thing would be that, I as an African, that is like, where one sort of like say these things do have an impact as as a global patron. One gets involved and say like, you can we cannot stand back and not say, as Africans we don't know what happens when you have such wars. We've seen them, and we will also upon a time, there will be a time when we also have to like call upon, the world to sort of like intervene in some of those similar challenges that we've had across the continent. It is not an easy one for a business person, and for a person like myself, it's not uh, it's not taking a political stance as much as saying, dealing with some of the ramifications of what a war can do and the impact that it does have. And were this to happen on the continent, I think from a patron point of view, it's something that one then would then need to sort of like, say, oh, this is also happening on the continent. And again, in that respect, we might need to call upon the world and say, okay, we are having this impact when like, there's, this political warfare which is going on. How then do we address that? And I think that's where, one focuses one's attention. That,
This is big stuff. If you start unlayering the onion, you really have to do quite a lot of reflection. Because, for instance, on the Global Citizen website, again, apart from them saying stand up with Ukraine, they say that the biggest losers the people who are going to be most affected by the war in Ukraine are Africans because of the way that higher food prices are going to put more people into poverty. So it's a heck of a lot of complex stuff. But I suppose at your stage in life now, as the chairman in certain respects, you're looking. Or are you looking to get your teeth into something on a more global scale? Because that's very much what this is.
Alec, one thing I sort of like, I think, shared with you also some time back. I think this shows the globality and the connectedness of everything that we do, that we all live on one planet, that we all have a responsibility. You remember, like, when I talk, I say, like, talent doesn't respect borders, it goes everywhere. Capital doesn't respect borders, it goes everywhere. And in our business, like, in media, we say content does not respect borders, it goes everywhere. And I think we also see how this war just affects everybody. you know uh, uh, Oil prices impacting us, the issues of food security being us being impacted upon. We have, like, no students who had to, like, no come back, and, like, because they were studying in Ukraine. So this is not something that we can all, say we don't. We all are global citizens. We all get impacted. The issue of the climate impact of all these things. When it comes to Africa, Africa gets the most affected because it doesn't have the resources to fend for itself when those sort of, like, climate crises hit us. So we do have to find a way that, like, not be bystanders when these things happen, because we are gonna get affected anyway. So then, what then role then do we play to ensure that we perhaps have a better community? We have, like, better, like, engagements amongst us as global citizens, because that's, you know that's the crux of it all. We all get sort of affected. You can't stand aside and say, like, no, you're gonna go off somewhere and this is not gonna affect you.
How are you going to practically play a part in this? Because from what you've just unpacked now, I can see it's very close to your heart, and it's the way you see the world as a
Mm,
global citizen.
mm.
But how do you get, for instance, Cyril Ramaphosa is also very involved in global citizen, and yet on Ukraine he's taken a line that has been highly criticized by most people around the world. And I guess the board of Global Citizen, if there is such a thing, would have said, "Whoa, this is one of our people," and he's actually on the other side of the fence almost. So how are you going to practically change hearts and minds to start properly embracing these incredibly noble issues that it stands for and that you clearly align yourself with?
I think those, for a business person like myself, are very practical, Alec, because to the extent that we have more people, engaged, to the extent that we have more people, economically not excluded, to the extent that we get the continent, like, more included in the global economy and better improving its position, that improves the lot of everybody. And, one of my sort of, like, uh, focus areas with regards to, not for one of the focus areas, but, like, the one which, like, resonated even, like, more with me, was the whole issue of, like, focusing on the systematic barriers which keep developing economies sort of, like, out of the mainstream, or out of the capacity to sort of, like, compete. If you look at, like, during the pandemic, like, and it's still ongoing, as COVID hit us, and if you look at all the sort of, like, you know uh, 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 measures which, the and stimulus packages which were put in place for the, some of the first world economies, for some of, like, our northern sort of, like, peers, and how those stimulus packages, like, were sort of, like, used to stimulate those economies, get them again back on track and happening. I mean, and the rates at which some of, like, that money was made available. What if we made, those same sort of, like, great stimulus packages, like, from entities like the World Bank and IMF, created this the special drawing rights which can be created, which are there, which could be used to like assist some of these developing economies. And like in the main, I would like to speak from an African point of view, whereby we can get this sort of like appropriately, positioned or priced capital to come and assist the continent with that stimulus again after this pandemic. Prior to this pandemic, you know, a large part of the African continent, we were seeing growth. There was growth from a continental point of view, but now we've like hit a major setback. We've had more people fall into like extreme poverty, you know, uh, again. So if we could tap into these hundreds of billions of like special drawing rights, with those types of institutions, those could go a long way, towards sort of like assisting us get out of like maybe like the position we find ourselves in as Africa. And that's where like those things for me matter. And to the extent that we can get some of that capital coming in, do having the impact that it has, like appropriately sort of like priced or like provided to the continent, we can start addressing some of those issues which we have. We can start addressing the young girls and women plight in terms of like schooling, in terms of health, in terms of like ensuring that like the most vulnerable get sort of like addressed. And we know that there's studies which show that like if you address the plight of like young girls and women, the impact on any economy gets sort of like much more felt, because of the like the role that women and tend to play in the community from an multiplication benefit point of view. So I think that for me does that. And to the extent that let's say we can get some of that capital again coming in, we can like improve some of our infrastructure, because we don't even have the capacity to withstand some of this climate change uh, you know, predicament we find ourselves in. And like as Africans, our economies get hit more. We have the inability to withstand, the some of these extreme conditions as they develop, climatic conditions as they develop. So that's the way I see that enabling us to get back in there and give us a chance to sort of like compete. Because some of this, take for instance climate change issues, you know Africa did not like not even get through that industrialization sort of like period wherein like we contributed a lot to this climate sort of like I call it a climate pandemic, that maybe if there is such a sort of like concept that we find ourselves in. But because we all share one world, we get impacted, and we don't have the tools to like defend ourselves. So we do need that capacity to develop, and those stimulus packages to do that. And I think some of these systemic barriers need to be removed, to sit at a table and say, "This, let's do this so that this we can start addressing conditions which lead to extreme poverty." And we know we find them on our continent.
It's an interesting topic, and one that's going to continue exercising minds for a long, long time to come.